Greetings. My name is Lynn Holzman, and I'm the Vice President of Women's Basketball at the NCAA. On behalf of the NCAA Division I Women's Basketball Committee, I'd like to welcome you to a peek behind the curtain of what goes into the making of the NCAA Division I Women's Basketball Championship bracket each March. This video series will provide details regarding the informational resources available to the committee, as well as take a closer look at what is included in the selection, seeding, and bracketing of the 68-team tournament field. The NCAA Division I Women's Basketball Committee is comprised of 12 individuals that come from member conferences and schools. The mission statement of the committee is to administer the championship with the highest level of integrity. The committee's actions are guided by a commitment to a fair and equitable championship while embracing sportsmanship, diversity, student-athlete well-being, and education. The committee is dedicated to a continued enhancement of the championship experience for all student-athletes, coaches, administrators, and fans. Each year, the committee creates strategic priorities and tasks the women's basketball staff with putting these goals into action. One of the strategic priorities this year, which fell under the umbrella of aligning with key stakeholders, was to create a platform that provides our membership with a look into the selection process. This video series is aimed to provide our stakeholders with a high-level overview of the NCAA tournament selection process and will include 4 chapters. 1. How the committee prepares by watching a lot of games, and then the resulting metrics, data, and conference reporting. 2. Selecting teams. 3. The seeding of the teams. And 4. The bracketing of the teams. March Madness is a favorite time of year for women's basketball fans, with the release of the bracket signaling the start of another championship. As you will see in this video series, each step plays an integral part as the committee selects the best 36 at-large teams in the country and then seeds and builds a 68-team championship bracket. Follow along with us on this series and discover what goes into the building of the bracket that you see on Selection Sunday.
Hello, and welcome to the NCAA Division I Women's Basketball Championship Selection, Seeding, and Bracketing video series that will provide insight into the work conducted annually by members of the NCAA Division I Women's Basketball Committee. The series will detail what goes into the process that results in the 68-team championship bracket announced each March on Selection Sunday. Among the resources available to the committee are an extensive season-long evaluation of teams through watching games, conference monitoring calls and regional advisory rankings, complete box scores and results, head-to-head results, results versus common opponents, imbalanced conference schedules and results, overall and non-conference strength of schedule, the quality of wins and losses, road record, player and coach availability, and other special circumstances that could affect a team's resume. Each of the 12 committee members uses these various resources to form their own opinions, resulting in the committee's consensus position on teams, selection, and seeding. Taking all of this information into consideration, the committee will discuss and vote upon the best 36 at-large teams in the country, which will join the 32 automatic qualifiers to form a 68-team field that will determine a national champion. In Chapter 1, we will detail committee selection criteria. This includes: what does conference monitoring entail? What makes up the NCAA evaluation tool net rankings and how are those rankings utilized? What is meant by a team sheet? What are the principles and procedures that the committee follows in building the bracket? And what are the 3 phases that go into building the 68-team championship bracket? Selection to the tournament is based upon an extensive array of factors, with the 12 committee members spending a substantial amount of time watching games, evaluating teams, and reviewing data. The committee has established a list of 14 selection criteria that they refer to during the selection process, with each committee member deciding on priority order of those 14 factors, with all of these factors part of the overall decision-making process. The committee team selection criteria priorities include the following, listed alphabetically: availability of talent, bad losses, common opponents, competitive in-losses, conference record, early competition versus late competition, head-to-head, NCAA evaluation tool net rankings, non-conference record, observable component, overall record, regional rankings, significant wins, strength of schedule. Each of the 12 committee members, except for the chair, is responsible for monitoring 5 to 6 conferences during the season, either in a primary or secondary role. While it is a responsibility to monitor specific conferences, it should be noted that a committee member is not working on that league's behalf during the selection process. The objective of the program is to share information learned from observing games involving teams in the league and from talking to conference personnel. This process ensures maximum relevant information is being shared among committee members in an organized and streamlined manner. It also affords conferences the opportunity to directly provide information for the committee's review and provides committee members with essential information throughout the season and in advance of the selection meeting. Subsequently, it is the committee member's responsibility to report to the full committee any pertinent data. This includes notable outcomes, the status of injured and unavailable players and coaches, important statistics and data points, and any information deemed worthy of sharing. Aside from receiving information directly from the conferences, the primary and secondary conference monitors will schedule calls with league office personnel beginning about a month after the season starts, with the final discussion taking place shortly before the selections week in March. In addition to the discussions with the monitors, conference officials are asked to provide a weekly form with current information for all teams the conference feels should be under consideration for tournament participation. In addition, the committee conducts several calls from January up until selections, where each member provides updates on schools from each league to his or her colleagues. The conference monitors include the most meaningful information and their observations about the teams from the leagues for which they serve as monitors, providing a more thorough evaluation of a team's strengths and weaknesses, along with information such as updates on injured or unavailable players or coaches due to injuries, illness, or suspensions, is key information for all committee members to be aware. Established in the early 2000s, the conference monitoring program's objective is to assure the maximum amount of information is shared amongst committee members. Another resource at the committee's disposal are the Regional Advisory Committee rankings, which offer coaches an opportunity to have a voice in the selection room. Each of the 32 conferences is responsible for identifying a head coach who participates in 3 pre-ranking calls and then votes on the top 20 teams in their region 3 times during the season. These private, cumulative ballots are then shared with the committee for their reference during the season and in advance of selections. One of the many team sorting tools available to the committee is the NCAA evaluation tool, or NET for short. The NET ranking has been used by the committee since the 2020-2021 season. NET measures the team's quality and helps to evaluate team resumes for selection and seeding in the NCAA tournament. This contemporary metric is used to sort each school's team sheet, breaking down each opponent by NET and placing them in an appropriate team sheet category. Net ranking is determined by who you played, where you played, how efficiently you played, and the result of the game. Generally speaking, predictive metrics measure how good a team is, while results-based metrics gauge strength of their resume. The net's predictive element is the adjusted net efficiency, which uses a standard basketball efficiency rating for both offense and defense, but considers the quality of your opponent and the location of the game. The results-oriented factor in the net is the Team Value Index, which is an algorithm set up to reward teams who beat other good teams. Teams are rewarded or penalized based on the quality of the opponent, the location of the game, and the outcome. Games played against non-Division I opponents count in the NCAA statistics and records, but do not count in the net. It is important to note that while very important, the net is one of the many selection criteria that the committee utilizes. Being ranked in a certain position among the net rankings does not guarantee a team will or will not get an at-large invitation to the tournament, as the net is just one part of the evaluation process and one of the 14 committee selection criteria. A team sheet provides a real-time snapshot of a school's season to date for the committee. Games sorted on the left side of a team sheet are indicative of a strong schedule, while games populated on the right side are games played against teams with lower net rankings. Each team's net can change each day, whether a team won, lost, or did not play. The women's basketball team sheet provides a snapshot of a team detailing, among many things, overall record, home, away record, record in the last 10 games, net ranking, strength of schedule, and ranking of wins in 5 different win rank categories based on net rankings. Here you see an example of a team sheet that the committee can access at any point during the season. This sheet includes a key that illustrates what each of the different categories represent. Guide rails for establishing a tournament field have been set, called Principles and Procedures for Establishing the Bracket, which are reviewed and updated by the committee each summer to match changes in the game. The Principles and Procedures detail committee voting procedures. These are general set policies the committee must abide by during the selection process that include but are not limited to the following. The committee selects the 36 best teams that aren't automatic qualifiers for their conference to fill the at-large berths. There is no limit on the number of at-large teams the committee may select from one conference. A member shall not answer questions about the team the individual represents, except for factual questions. A conference administrator is permitted to answer general questions about teams in the conference the individual represents. At no point in the process shall a committee member vote for a team the individual represents as a school administrator or a school within the conference they represent as a conference administrator. All votes will be by secret ballot. We want to set the table for the next 3 chapters, in which we will dive into details about the selection, seeding, and bracketing process. The 3 phases of the process are to select the best 36 at-large teams to join the 32 teams that earn the automatic qualifier into the championships, seed those 68 teams in order from 1 to 68, and then bracket them using the prescribed principles. Welcome to Chapter 2 of our video series designed to share insight into the selection, seeding, and bracketing process for the Division I Women's Basketball Championship. Our focus will be on selecting the field. The first action item that takes place in the selection room is the 12-person committee's casting of their individual initial ballots. This generally takes place Wednesday afternoon. This is a relatively simple process that involves each committee member designating teams as tournament locks for at-large bids in the event they don't win their league's automatic bid, or designating them as under-consideration teams, meaning the committee member isn't fully convinced they are a tournament team, but at the very least think they possibly could get in over the course of discussion and further votes that will take place during the selection meeting. Committee members can vote up to 36 teams as at-large locks, though it is much more common for them to designate about 23 to 27 teams in this category. Committee members can vote as many teams as they'd like on their under-consideration lists. Only schools that merit serious consideration for a possible at-large berth to the tournament should be included. On average, about 30 schools receive this designation. Once each committee member electronically submits their ballot, the votes are tallied and 2 separate boards are created. The at-large board, consisting of teams that received enough support to be voted into the tournament as a result of the initial ballot, and the under-consideration board, which consists of teams that got enough support to merit discussion for possible inclusion into the field. Some of these teams will get into the field over the course of the week. Some, unfortunately for them, will not. So how does a team earn a spot on either the at-large or under-consideration boards? Teams getting all but 3 eligible votes as an at-large team are in the field. For most teams, that is a minimum of 9 of the 12 committee votes. However, since committee members may not vote for their own team, some teams require 8 of the maximum 11 at-large votes. If a team fell short of that threshold but received at least 4 votes as either an at-large or under-consideration team, it qualifies for placement on the under-consideration board. Teams that won their regular season conference championship and earned a number 1 seed in their conference tournament automatically get placed on the under-consideration board. This is what the initial ballot looks like. On each committee member's screen, he or she will see an alphabetical listing of each team eligible for the tournament, followed by buttons for at-large and under consideration. Teams that are ineligible to participate in the tournament have their voting buttons disabled, as do teams that have already won their conference tournament and thus earned the league's automatic qualifier. In addition, committee members may not vote for their own school. The examples shown here demonstrated that if a committee member was from Arizona, they would not be able to vote for the Wildcats. Otherwise, committee members can vote for as many teams under consideration as they deem worthy for possible inclusion into the field. Remember, though, there is a cap to the number of at-large schools a committee member can vote for. At the top of the screen, committee members will see both a counter for each of the categories, as well as a summary of the schools that have received their support. Once finished, the committee member will click the Submit button at the top of the page. After all 12 votes have been submitted and electronically tabulated, the two boards are formed. A list of teams that received at least 4 votes of support to merit inclusion on the Under Consideration board, and a list of teams that received all but 3 eligible votes and thus were voted into the tournament field. This means that for teams that haven't even started their conference tournament at this point on Wednesday, they're already in the field no matter what happens in their league tournament. An early loss or multiple wins could negatively or positively impact the seed they ultimately get in the NCAA tournament, but their place in the March Madness field is secure. You will also notice a list of schools that are already automatic qualifiers. Several conferences determine their AQ because their tournaments conclude prior to Wednesday's casting of the initial ballot. Those schools are already in the NCAA tournament, so when it comes to selecting teams, they are not part of any discussion. Only when the seeding process begins do those teams begin to get talked about. If a team fails to be included among the 4 teams receiving the fewest points for 2 consecutive ranked ballots, it shall be returned to the Under Consideration board. The committee's sole focus as it begins the selection process will be on the teams on the Under Consideration board. Remember, the teams on the at-large board, along with the teams on the AQ board, are already in the field. So now the committee's charge is to select additional teams not yet in the tournament. Each committee's computer screen will have a list of the under consideration teams, and each member is to select, in no particular order, the best 8 teams from this group. Here's what the screen will look like for each committee member. Keep in mind again, if a team that's represented by a committee member is among this list of schools, the voting button will be disabled for that member. Once 8 teams have been checked, the committee member hits the Submit button. When all of the votes are in, the committee is informed of which 8 schools received the most votes. This is an alphabetical list. Committee members don't know how many votes any of these schools received. They just know these are the 8 with the most support. In this example, the 8 schools are Arkansas, Colorado, Creighton, Florida, Kansas, Kansas State, Miami, and South Florida. You see those schools in what's called the at-large holding cross-country board. The next step is to conduct a vote amongst these 8 teams, meaning each committee member will rank the teams in order. It's a cross-country vote, meaning a team received 1 point for a first-place vote and 8 points for an 8th-place vote. The 4 teams with the fewest points are in the field as at-large teams, while the other 4 remain in holding. This video shows you how it works. Once the process is complete, committee members will hit the Submit button and the results are shared. On this screen, you will notice 4 new teams in the at-large field shown in red. These are the 4 teams voted in on that election. They include Colorado, Florida, Miami, and South Florida. The other 4 teams, Arkansas, Creighton, Kansas, and Kansas State, are in holding. The process then repeats itself. Of the teams remaining on the Under Consideration board, the committee will select the best 8 in no order. Since there are already 4 teams in holding, only the top 4 teams from this vote make it to the next cross-country at-large vote. Here, you'll see a smaller Under Consideration board. Remember, 4 teams have been voted to the field and 4 teams are in holding. Each committee member picks the best 8 from this list in no order and hits the Submit button. The 4 teams receiving the most votes join the 4 holdovers. They are the teams in red: Dayton, Missouri State, Villanova, and Washington State, and they join Arkansas, Creighton, Kansas, and Kansas State for the next ranking vote. These 8 teams are then presented to the committee for another rank 8. Once again, the 4 teams with the fewest points from this cross-country ballot are in the tournament. The 4 who didn't get voted in remain in holding. In this example, the 4 teams voted into the field were Creighton, Kansas, Kansas State, and Washington State. You will also notice that the lowest 4 teams from the rank vote remain in the holding cross-country board: Arkansas, Dayton, Missouri State, and Villanova. However, if a team fails to be included among the 4 teams receiving the fewest points for 2 consecutive rank ballots, it shall be returned to the under consideration board. In this example, Arkansas fits the criteria and therefore will return to the under consideration board. This process repeats itself until 36 at-large teams have been selected. It's important to note that as you get later into the process and the number of teams on the under consideration board gets smaller, the number of teams you pick from a list and the number of teams you rank for a vote will decrease. This is commonly referred to as taking smaller bites at the apple. These steps are all spelled out in the Principles and Procedures document. It's also important to note that the process of selecting teams and seeding teams happens simultaneously. Throughout selection week, the committee's focus will shift back and forth from selecting at-large teams to seeding teams that are already in the field. Keep in mind, during selection weekend, conference play is still taking place, which could impact analysis of team resumes, even if a team has already been moved onto a board. This real-time analysis is conducted by the committee throughout the selection, seeding, and bracketing process. Welcome to Chapter 3 of our video series designed to share insight into the selection, seeding, and bracketing process for the Division I Women's Basketball Championship. Our focus will be on seeding the field. As we hinted at the end of Chapter 2, you will find similarities between the selection process and seeding. The obvious difference is with selecting teams, the committee is dealing with teams that may or may not be in the tournament. With seeding, the focus is exclusively on teams that have already been selected to the field or have earned their way in by winning their conference's automatic qualifier. Procedurally, however, it works the same. First, each committee member lists the best 8 teams from all the teams voted into the tournament. Teams in the tournament include AQs and at-larges. Then, each committee member ranks the top 8 teams in order 1 through 8 and submits their vote. The top 4 teams from the rank ballot will be placed into the seed list in order of seed number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. The committee begins evaluating those teams on the at-large and automatic qualifier board. Each committee member will select the best 8 teams from the at-large and automatic qualifier board in no particular order to be added to the seed list holding cross-country board. The process starts with the committee taking all of the tournament teams, whether they are at-large or AQs, and voting on the best 8 teams in no particular order. This screen shows you the list of teams that are in the tournament. Some were voted in on the initial ballot, some earned their way in by winning their conference tournament, and others were voted in on the initial selection process. Regardless of how they made their way into the tournament, they are presented to the committee for a list 8 of the best teams. The process will look the same as in our previous chapter. All tournament teams are listed and the committee picks the best 8 in no particular order. When finished, they hit the Submit button. In this example, the 8 schools that moved to the holding cross-country seeding board are Baylor, Iowa State, LSU, Louisville, NC State, South Carolina, Stanford, and UConn. The next step is to conduct a vote amongst these 8 teams, meaning each committee member will rank the teams in order. Once all 12 votes have been submitted, the committee will see the results. The top 8 vote getters will go to a rank 8 cross-country vote to determine the initial number 1 seeds. As you can see here, the top 8 vote getters in alphabetical order were Baylor, Iowa State, LSU, Louisville, NC State, South Carolina, Stanford, and UConn. The ballot will look like this, simply an alphabetical list of the 8 schools. Each committee member will vote by clicking on the number 1 button for his or her best team and ranking all 8 schools. Once each ballot has been submitted, results are shared in order. The top 4 in this cross-country vote will go on to the seed list in order as the 4 number 1 seeds. It's important to note this is an initial seed list, not the final product. In this example, the committee has seeded South Carolina as the overall number 1 seed, while Stanford, NC State, and Louisville, in that order, are the other 3 number 1 seeds. You will also notice the other 4 schools are in the holding area. They include Baylor, Iowa State, LSU, and UConn. The process for seeding teams now repeats. To begin the process of seeding the number 2 line, the committee will ignore for now the 4 teams that are in holding and focus on all other tournament teams that have not yet been seeded. Again, each committee member will select its best 8 teams from that group. The top 4 vote getters will join the 4 in holding for a rank 8. The top 4 teams to come out of that vote will initially occupy spots 5 through 8. In other words, the 4 number 2 seeds on the overall seed list. These same steps are repeated until each tournament team is placed on the seed list. Remember, though, the committee will toggle back and forth throughout selection week between selecting teams from the under consideration board for inclusion into the tournament and seeding those tournament teams. On this screen, you'll see the top 4 teams from that vote in red. They are Indiana, Iowa, Maryland, and Texas. They join the 4 from holding, Baylor, Iowa State, LSU, and UConn, for the next ranking. This next vote will determine the 4 number 2 seeds. The committee will rank these 8 teams and hit the submit button. As shown in this video, each committee member will vote by clicking on the number 1 button for his or her best team and ranking all 8 schools. Once each ballot has been submitted, results are shared in order. The top 4 ranked teams in this vote will go on to the seed list in rank order as the 4 number 2 seeds. In this case, Baylor received the most support and falls initially at the number 5 spot on the overall seed list. The Lady Bears are followed by UConn, Iowa, and Iowa State, and that quartet of teams are, at least for now, the number 2 seeds for the tournament. The process continues with each committee member submitting a list of the best 8 remaining teams that are in the tournament as automatic qualifiers or at-large selections. The 4 teams with the highest vote totals are added to the teams carried over to comprise the next seed list ballot. Steps number 3, 4, and 5 from the principles and procedures for seeding are repeated until all the teams are seeded. Remember how we said that the seed list changes over the course of the week? That's because several times over the course of the week, the committee goes through a continued analysis of the seed list. This analysis only takes place with teams that have already been placed on the seed list, and its purpose is to ensure the committee is completely comfortable with the order of teams. Remember, the seed list serves as the committee's ranking of all 68 teams in order from top to bottom. Only after the list is fully analyzed can the bracketing process begin. This analysis typically concludes late Saturday night or sometimes on Sunday morning, which is why bracketing does not begin typically until Sunday. So now you know about the various resources the committee has at its disposal, and we've discussed the selection and seeding process. So what's left? It's the bracket, of course. This step gets more attention from our membership, the media, and our fans, but it's also the least understood of the entire process. Welcome to the 4th and final chapter of our video series designed to share insight into the selection, seeding, and bracketing process for the Division I Women's Basketball Championship. In this chapter, we will show you how the bracket comes together. When it comes to bracketing, it's important to note that starting with the 2023 championship, the regional rounds are played at 2 sites with 8 teams competing at each site. This is a change from the previous format that featured 4 regional sites with 4 teams at each site. This move will be great for the student-athlete and fan experience. Though the bracketing principles have not changed, having 2 sites instead of 4 will allow the committee more discretion when placing teams into regional pods, which we'll walk you through in a moment. In addition, the committee recently determined that each site would host 2 Sweet 16 regional semifinal games on Friday and Saturday, while each site will host an Elite 8 regional championship game on Sunday and Monday. Here, you see an example of the schedule for each regional site, which are labeled Site 1 and Site 2. At each site, there will be 2 pods with 4 teams. For example, at Regional Site 1, the 4 teams in Pod A will compete in Friday's regional semifinals, and winning teams will advance to Sunday's regional final. In Pod B, the teams will compete in Saturday's regional semifinals, and winning teams will advance to Monday's regional final. 2 teams from each regional site will then advance to the women's Final Four. This schedule is identical for both regional sites. There are several bracketing principles by which the committee must abide. Before we dive into those principles, here is a general summary of the 4 regional pods on the bracket. There are 16 seeds in each of the 4 regional pods. Teams on each seed line, number 1, number 2, number 3, etc., are generally close to being equal. For example, teams seeded 5th in their respective regional pod are ranked 17, 18, 19, and 20 on the overall seed list, which you will recall is the committee's ranking of the 68 tournament teams. There are 4 groups within each regional pod, which are grouped together to form pairings for first and second round matchups. Shaded in light green, one group is made up of seeds 1, 8, 9, and 16. In the first round, the 1 seed plays the 16 and the 8 seed plays the 9. The winners of those games play in the second round. The other 3 groups work similarly and are color-coded as well. They include seeds 4 versus 13 and 5 versus 12, which are shaded in dark green, 2 versus 15 and 7 versus 10, which are shaded in light blue, and 3 versus 14 and 6 versus 11, which are shaded in dark blue. Each of these groups is assigned to the same first and second round site, which is hosted on the campus of the top 4 seeds. Here are some of the important bracketing principles. Each of the first 4 teams selected from a conference shall be placed in different regional pods if they are seated on the first 4 lines. Teams from the same conference shall not meet prior to the regional final if they played each other 3 or more times during the regular season and conference tournament. The committee will attempt to keep conference teams from meeting until the regional final round. If the committee is unable to balance the bracket after exhausting all possible options, it has the flexibility to permit 2 teams from the same conference to meet each other after the first round. As shown here, each of the 4 regional pods is a column. Within each pod, teams placed on lines shaded in yellow could meet in the regional semifinal. The same is true of the white lines within each regional pod. Winning teams from the yellow and white lines within a regional pod will meet in the regional final. The last 4 at-large teams on the overall seed list, as well as teams seeded 65 through 68, will be paired to compete in the first 4 games on Wednesday and Thursday following the announcement of the field. If there are no conflicts, the last at-large team on the seed list will be paired with the second-to-last at-large team on the seed list. The other first 4 games will consist of the third-to-last at-large team on the seed list playing the fourth-to-last at-large team on the seed list, as well as seed 65 versus 66 and seed 67 versus 68. The winners of the first 4 games will advance to a first-round game at the site at which they are currently competing. Under additional considerations, if possible, rematches of non-conference regular season games should be avoided in the first 4 and first and second rounds. Any principle can be relaxed if two or more teams from the same conference are among the last four at-large seeded teams participating in the first four games. After examining the previous 2 years' brackets, the committee shall attempt to avoid moving teams or conferences out of their natural region or geographic area an inordinate number of times. If possible, rematches from the previous tournament should be avoided in the first and second rounds. First and second round sites will be awarded to the top 16 seeded teams that submit a bid that meets the requirements for hosting. In the event that a top 16 seeded team does not submit a bid, or the bid does not meet requirements for hosting, the committee will select a host from the remaining submitted bids that meet the requirements for hosting. In order to adhere to the bracketing principles, it may not be possible to select the next highest seed to host. The first four games will be assigned, one to each of the four first and second round sites, based on the bracket placement of teams participating in the first four games. For the regional competition, a team may not be assigned to play in any arena in which it has played more than 3 regular season games, not including conference postseason tournaments. A team outside of the top 4 seed lines may be moved one bracket line from its true seed line, for example, from a number 13 seed line to a number 12 seed line when it is placed in the bracket, if necessary, to meet the principles. The committee begins the process of placing teams into the bracket by order of the S-curve. The S-curve is made up of the overall seed list that is created by and then used by the committee when it comes to bracketing decisions. It's called the S-curve because it snakes through the seeding list based on groupings for each seed from 1 to 68. By order of the S-curve, the committee will assign each team to a regional and first and second round site by taking into account distance from site, mode of transportation, and accessibility of fans. The overall number 1 seed is placed in the closest regional site as the top seed in that regional pod, followed by the overall number 2 and number 3 seeds being assigned to the closest regional pod. The fourth of the number 1 seeds gets the region pod that remains vacant. The committee may relax the principle of keeping teams as close to their area of natural interest for teams seated on the number 2 line to avoid, for example, the overall number 5 seed being sent to the same region as the overall number 1 seed. The committee then places the number 2 seeds, teams ranked 5 through 8 on the overall seed list, in the bracket using the same geographic principles. However, movement can take place based on other principles that take precedent over geography. For example, the top 4 teams from a conference have to be placed in separate regions. The committee then places the 4 number 3 seeds, teams ranked 9 through 12 on the overall seed list, and the 4 number 4 teams, seeds ranked 13 through 16, into the bracket, using the same principles. After the top 4 seed lines have been assigned, the committee will review the relative strengths of the regions by adding the true seed numbers in each region to determine if any severe numerical imbalance exists. Generally, no more than 5 points should separate the lowest and highest total. Once the committee has the top 16 teams placed in their respective regional pods, it begins the process of assigning first and second round on-campus sites based on the location of the top 16 teams. Once that takes place, we know that the number 1, 8, 9, and 16 seeds in that region, for example, will be at the same site for first and second rounds. These 4 teams will play at the campus site of the number 1 team. Similarly, the number 2 seeds will be paired with the 7, 10, and 15 seeds from their regional pod. These 4 teams will play at the campus site of the number 2 team. The number 3 seeds will be paired with the 6, 11, and 14 seeds from their regional pod. These 4 teams will play at the campus site of the number 3 team. And the number 4 seeds will be paired with the 5, 12, and 13 seeds from their regional pod. These 4 teams will play at the campus site of the number 4 team. Once the committee begins the process of bracketing the 5 through 16 seeds, they will assign each team by order of the S-curve to a regional and first and second round site by taking into account distance from site, mode of transportation, and accessibility by fans. However, various bracketing principles may cause a change. Because of these principles, teams sometimes have to travel great distances. For example, a team could be assigned to a city farther away to avoid playing a conference rival. The following video shows the process for how first four teams will be determined and placed in the overall bracket. The Division I Women's Basketball Committee will use the selection principles and procedures to select and seed 68 teams. To demonstrate which 8 teams will play in the first 4 games, we will use this example of an overall seed list of teams. The designation of each team as either an automatic qualifier, AQ, or at-large, AL, is also shown. 2 of the first 4 games will involve the last 4 at-large teams that made it into the tournament, shown here in yellow. The other 2 games will involve seeds 65 to 68, shown here in green. Because the first 4 game winners advance into the first round, they will play for 1 seed spot as shown here. In the final step, the committee places all teams into the bracket using the bracketing principles. Although this example shows 2 of the first 4 games being 11 seeds, that may not always be the case, as it is based on what the overall seed positions are for those last 4 at-large teams. I will also note that the first 4 games may not always fall into different regions as shown in this example. Here is an example of how it might look in the bracket. There are additional considerations for the committee. These aren't principles that the group must abide by, but still the committee will try to avoid a bracket in which rematches of non-conference games take place in the first 4 or first and second rounds. Additionally, the committee will attempt to keep conference teams from meeting until the regional final round. The committee will also try to avoid having a team move out of its natural region or geographic area in consecutive years, and they also try to avoid first and second round rematches from the prior year's tournament. It's worth mentioning that all of this work is to construct a single bracket. Depending on the schedule of games being played in a handful of conference championship games on Selection Sunday, the committee will need contingency brackets based on those results. It could mean a team moves up or down on the seed list, and any change in the sequence of teams could mean changes to the bracket. That's a lot to digest, isn't it? The committee goes to great lengths to ensure it is abiding by all these principles so that it can set up the most competitively balanced tournament as possible. The announcement of the bracket triggers a flurry of other championship-related activity that includes the following: 68 teams booking 68 charter aircrafts with NCAA travel, 68 hotel room lists submitted to 68 team hotels, 68 teams determine hotel meals and catering during championship play, 68 teams, coaches, administrators, spirit squads, and bands prepare for travel to host sites, 68 practice times assigned, 68 buses in host cities booked and assigned, NCAA committee and committee representatives assigned to sites and finalized travel, 116 basketball officials and referees chosen and assigned to specific sites, games, and book travel. Media determine assignments, apply for credentials, and book travel. We hope you enjoyed this video series and gained some insight into the selection, seeding, and bracketing process for the Division I Women's Basketball Championship. Now that we have gone through the committee resources and covered the selection, seeding, and bracketing process, we would love to get your feedback. Please email NCAA Women's Basketball at diwbkb@ncaa.org with any comments or questions you might have.